There was an era when nearly every household garden contained a plant that most people today walk past without noticing. It wasn't rare, it wasn't exotic, it wasn't costly. Yet for generations, it was regarded as one of the most formidable plants a family could keep close to home. Long before laboratories, pharmaceuticals, and manufactured remedies existed, people depended on what grew just outside their doors. Among those plants, tansy carried a reputation that now feels almost unreal. Not because it was gentle, not because it was soothing, but because it was powerful, and at times dangerously so. Tansy was never an accidental weed. It was planted with intention. It appeared behind cottages, along fence lines, near livestock enclosures, and in monastery gardens throughout Europe. Farmers recognized it. Healers approached it with respect. Families understood one essential truth. This was not a plant to use lightly. Its small, bright yellow, button-like flowers looked cheerful, even innocent. But its aroma told a very different story. Sharp, bitter, medicinal. A scent insects instinctively avoided and animals learned to keep their distance from. That contrast alone says a great deal. In traditional herbal systems, tansy was never treated as a daily infusion or a comforting remedy. It was used carefully, deliberately, and according to knowledge passed down through generations. People didn't experiment with it. They followed established rules. Historically, tansy was closely linked to cleansing, not in a modern wellness sense, but in a practical, survival-driven one. It was used in a time when parasites, pests, and infestations were unavoidable parts of daily life. Humans faced them. Animals faced them. Homes faced them. And tansy played a role in protecting against them. Bundles of tansy were hung inside houses to deter insects. Fresh leaves were rubbed along doorframes, windows, and bedding. Dried plants were stored among grain and clothing. This wasn't based on guesswork or hope. It came from repeated observation that the plant worked. In livestock traditions, tansy carried a reputation that bordered on fear. Farmers knew it had a strong effect on internal systems. That knowledge came with strict boundaries. Too little had no effect. Too much caused harm. Its use was measured, seasonal, and intentional. What truly set tansy apart from many other plants was its potency. Even without understanding chemistry or compounds, people recognized its strength. This was not a plant consumed daily. It was used briefly and then stopped. That pattern alone separates it from most mild herbs. As industrial agriculture and modern medicine expanded, tansy slowly faded from everyday conversation. Not because it lost effectiveness, but because it didn't fit a world that prefers standardized doses and simplified solutions. Tansy doesn't behave uniformly in every situation. Its strength shifts with soil, climate, and growth stage. That made it unsuitable for mass application, but ideal for traditional, experience-based knowledge. Modern discussions often try to compare old plants directly to modern treatments. That's where misunderstanding begins. Traditional remedies were never designed to replace modern medicine one for one. They existed within a completely different way of thinking. People didn't ask, "Is this stronger than that?" They asked, "Does this solve the problem we are facing right now?" For centuries, tansy answered that question in specific, limited, and carefully respected ways. One reason tansy is rarely discussed today is safety. Traditional healers emphasized caution. This plant was not for children, not for pregnant women, not for long-term use. Understanding its limits was as important as understanding its uses. When that cultural knowledge faded, the plant itself became labeled as dangerous rather than powerful. And once a plant earns that label, it's easier to forget it than to explain it. But forgetting doesn't erase history. In many old texts, tansy appears alongside other plants now considered foundational to herbal tradition. It wasn't obscure knowledge, it was mainstream, simply handled with care. Another reason tansy faded from use is that modern life eliminated many of the problems it once addressed. Controlled environments, processed food, sanitation, and veterinary care reduced the daily threats people once faced. When the problem disappears, the tool often follows. Yet the plant never vanished. Tansy still grows easily. It thrives in poor soil. It resists pests. It survives harsh winters and hot summers. It spreads quietly, almost as if it remembers its former role. Gardeners who grow tansy today often do so for non-medicinal reasons: companion planting, insect deterrence, or historical gardens. And even then they notice something familiar. Insects avoid it, animals avoid it. Nearby plants often suffer less pest damage. Those observations echo the past. Tansy's value was never based on mystery or superstition. It was built on consistency. Generation after generation saw the same effects and learned the same cautions. That's what many people forget. Traditional remedies were never casual. They were disciplined. Tansy represents a kind of knowledge modern society struggles to hold. The idea that something can be both useful and dangerous at the same time. That kind of power demands responsibility, not hype. So when people ask, why doesn't anyone talk about Tansy anymore? The answer is simple. It demands respect, it requires context, and it refuses to be simplified. In a world that prefers quick answers and safe slogans, Tansy doesn't fit. But for those who study traditional gardens, historical medicine, and old survival systems, Tansy still stands quietly in the background. Not forgotten, just waiting for those who understand that power without wisdom is never progress. And sometimes the plants we stop talking about are the ones that remind us how careful our ancestors had to be, and how much they truly understood. 2. Wormwood. If Tansy was the blade that struck swiftly, precise, abrupt, and unforgiving, then wormwood was the knife that remained in the hand long after the first cut. Wormwood didn't overwhelm the body in a single moment. It worked gradually through routine, rhythm, and persistence. That difference shaped how entire cultures understood and trusted it. Where Tansy required strict control and exact timing, wormwood allowed familiarity and continuity. Its bitterness became legendary. For centuries, bitterness itself was defined through wormwood. Writers didn't merely describe something as bitter. They compared it to wormwood. That image endured even after the plant slipped out of everyday life. Unlike Tansy, wormwood was rarely used alone. It was combined, diluted, adjusted, taken in small amounts, repeated over time. Its traditions emphasized moderation and continuity rather than intensity. This flexibility allowed wormwood to move easily across regions, climates, and belief systems. In monasteries, wormwood was cultivated with care and routine. In rural communities, it grew wild but was gathered thoughtfully. Along trade routes, it appeared dried, powdered, infused, and blended. It became part of systems, not isolated remedies. Where Tansy arrived briefly and powerfully, wormwood stayed. That endurance mattered as formal medicine began to emerge. Plants that could be measured, repeated, and documented adapted more easily to changing medical frameworks. Plants that relied on intuition, restraint, and strict boundaries often faded from official use. Traditional healers sensed this difference instinctively. Wormwood was seen as forgiving. Errors could be corrected, dosages adjusted. Time allowed understanding to develop. Tansy offered no such margin. This is why wormwood was often chosen as a first step. Not because it lacked strength, but because it allowed space for learning. In traditional knowledge, forgiveness was a form of safety. Wormwood was not meant to end a process. It was meant to begin one. 3. Black walnut. Black walnut entered traditional awareness through a different path entirely. Its reputation wasn't built on legend, it was built on observation. People noticed what happened when black walnut hulls were handled. Skin darkened, cloth stained, tools permanently marked. The plant left undeniable traces behind. Nothing about it was subtle. That staining took on meaning. If a plant could mark wood and fabric so deeply, people believed it could reach just as deeply in other ways. Compared to Tansy's sudden force, black walnut felt slow and deliberate. Its influence unfolded over time. Where Tansy struck like lightning, black walnut moved like water. Steady, shaping, and persistent. This distinction shaped how people trusted it. Some traditions favored black walnut precisely because it didn't rush. It allowed the body time to respond. Others avoided it because its effects lingered, and lingering power made people cautious. Black walnut required commitment. Once its use began, it couldn't be ignored. There was no pretending that nothing had happened. This stood in contrast to wormwood, which could be paused, modified, or stopped with relative ease. Black walnut stayed, both symbolically and practically. That permanence made it respected, and it made it feared. The comparison between Tansy and black walnut reveals something central to traditional thinking. Strength was not judged by intensity alone, it was judged by duration. A storm passes quickly. Erosion reshapes the land forever. Both are powerful, but only one changes the future quietly. 4. Garlic. Garlic appears modest, and that modesty is exactly where its strength lives. While tansy lingered at the margins of gardens and wormwood occupied a careful middle space, garlic belonged everywhere. It moved effortlessly between roles: food, seasoning, protection, ritual, medicine, and superstition. It crossed these boundaries so naturally that people stopped noticing the crossings at all. Garlic did everything, quietly. It wasn't honored for dramatic effects or sudden change. It was valued because it was always there. Day after day, it showed up on the table. Year after year, it went back into the soil. Generation after generation, its knowledge passed along without ceremony or warning. No strict rules, no fear, no elaborate rituals. Compared to tansy, garlic was gentle. Compared to wormwood, it was sustaining. Compared to black walnut, it was forgiving. Its influence came not from intensity, but from accumulation. Traditional cultures understood something modern thinking often overlooks. Effectiveness doesn't always require force. Some forms of power emerge through consistency. Garlic never demanded attention. It never signaled danger. It never drew sharp boundaries. That is why garlic became universally accepted, and tansy did not. Tansy required discipline. Garlic rewarded routine. When modern discussions attempt to measure traditional plants against modern solutions, this difference is often ignored. Tansy was never intended for daily use. Wormwood required respect and moderation. Black walnut demanded commitment. Garlic simply needed to be present. And presence, sustained over time, reshapes systems quietly. Both tansy and garlic worked, but they operated on opposite philosophies. One corrected sharply, the other supported continuously. That contrast explains why one vanished from kitchens, and the other never did. 5. Rue. Rue may be the closest philosophical counterpart to tansy, not because it acts the same way, but because it demands the same depth of respect. Rue was never a casual addition to the garden. From the moment it was planted, it carried intention. It wasn't grown for abundance or beauty alone. It was grown for presence. Historically, rue stood at thresholds, near doorways, along borders, beside paths. Where tansy enforced boundaries through action, rue defined them through awareness. Rue was associated with vision, not literal sight, but perception. It was believed to sharpen discernment, heighten sensitivity, and reveal imbalance. In some traditions, rue was used before major decisions, rituals, or transitions, not to force change, but to recognize it. Tansy, by contrast, entered when awareness alone was no longer enough. That distinction mattered. In symbolic language, rue warned that something was wrong. Tansy corrected what had already crossed the boundary. Because of this, the two were rarely combined without careful intent. Traditional gardeners understood that stacking powerful influences wasn't strength. It was recklessness. Power was managed through separation. Rue had its place. Tansy had its moment. Even their growth habits mirrored this philosophy. Rue grows slowly, woody, and persistent. It does not rush. It does not spread aggressively. It stays where it is planted and asks to be approached deliberately. Tansy spreads freely. It fills space. It does not wait for permission. Placed side by side, the two symbolized imbalance unless guided by knowledge and purpose. Traditional systems were not afraid of strong plants. They were wary of careless combinations. That mindset has nearly vanished. Today, plants are often judged in isolation, stripped of context. Historically, meaning came from relationships, where a plant grew, what surrounded it, and when it was used. Rue and tansy were not opposites. They were guardians stationed at different points along the same boundary.